The following broadcast is brought to you by Public House Media.
The latest headlines.
Hard to imagine them not as one of the best teams in history.
The insightful interviews.
Jared Greenberg, NBA TV.
Virtually all teams in basketball could have played Kevin Durant with the Warriors played him.
The hottest takes.
Go and play for a team talented as Golden State and win a championship.
Can all be found on Press Row. Here's your host.
It doesn't matter what your name is.
Christian Heimel.
Oh man, don't you just love this time of year? You know, everybody's got specific months or seasons or what that they absolutely love, and I'll be 100% honest. A lot of people like summer. A lot of people like those great warm months you can go to the beach. But October is one of my favorite months of the year, and it's because there's so much going on. You've got playoff baseball starting, college football, pro football are right in the thick of it all. Hockey is restarting, basketball is restarting, college basketball practice has opened up. It's just a great time of the year. So many sports. If you're a sports fan, October really is one of the best months of the year. Maybe other than probably March or April, where you got March Madness and you've got NBA and NHL really kind of winding down and getting exciting, and then of course baseball starting to kick up again. But I tell you, October is one of the best months of the year from a sports fan standpoint, and we are right in the midst of yet another great October right here at the start. Welcome on Press Row, everybody. I'm Christian Heimel. We are broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network, and there are so many ways you can listen to us and find us. We appreciate you, whether you're listening on Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, our website, thephmedia.com, iHeartRadio, Google Play, or iTunes. We certainly appreciate you guys being a part of the show each and every single week. Don't forget, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at PressRowPHM, or you can find us over on Facebook, Press Row Podcast, Public House Media. A big week in sports to recap, and another one coming up as well. We've got a great lineup here for you today from a guest standpoint. Josh Parcell, he is the host and founder of College Football Country, the podcast, as well as CFBcountry.com. He's going to touch on some of the bigger storylines in college football this week. Does Clemson deserve to be the number one team in the country? Is the SEC still the top conference in the nation? We'll find out from him. And then maybe some early Heisman talk as well. I know it is just the first week of October, but some great young talent starting to really emerge its way through here in college football, and making a lot of NFL fans exciting about who their team could potentially be drafting coming up in April. And then we also have Whitney McIntosh. She's a desk writer for SB Nation, Major League Baseball. Playoffs really getting underway in earnest today on Thursday, October 5th. You've got the ALDS, Red Sox, Astros at 4 o'clock, and then Yankees and Indians at 7:30 on the East Coast. Two incredibly exciting wild card games, which as much as people want to be upset and they don't like the one-game format, you only get that kind of excitement, that kind of atmosphere if you have a one-game playoff. But we'll begin today, as we do almost every week here in the fall, in the NFL, where there were some incredible games over this past weekend, some upsets, a lot of people starting to question some things for certain teams and whatnot, mainly the New England Patriots after a loss at home a loss at home over the weekend, which was very difficult against Carolina, 33-30 loss to them. And then a lot of people questioning as well how good the Buffalo Bills are. They went on the road and beat Atlanta 23-17. And just a couple of notes about this. You know, number one, I wouldn't be that concerned if you're New England. That defense has been atrocious. Yes, they are the worst defense passing-wise in the league right now. Second worst in terms of points given up. But Carolina is really starting to figure things out. They finally have a real full, healthy Cam Newton after the surgically repaired shoulder. They're starting to figure out how to use Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Stewart as well in that backfield. Meanwhile, as long as you have Tom Brady at quarterback, New England's offense is going to keep you in games. The defense is the issue, and I know a lot of people are kind of concerned about that. Matt Patricia and the defensive staff there really need to figure something out, mainly because you looked at a lot of those games, and Kelvin Benjamin was wide open on more than one occasion for Cam Newton. There was one drive where the Panthers just really went out screen by screen by screen, using McCaffrey and Stewart and Benjamin to just march down the field. So Pro Football Focus ranked the Patriots secondary as the number 2 secondary in the league. This was back over the summer, though. It just takes some time for these guys to get things together. I don't anticipate New England really struggling. Yes, they're 2-2 right now. 1-2 at home. The first time they've been 1-2 since Bill Belichick's first season in 2000, which, by the way, was their last losing season for the New England Patriots. So as much as there's a struggle right now for them defensively, I do think that they're going to start to figure things out as they get a little bit later into the year. It's going to start here tonight with them against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's an interesting thing to watch because Tampa Bay, I love Jameis Winston. I think I picked Tampa Bay to win the NFC South. I know a lot of people think I'm crazy with that, but I love the way that they play. Mike Evans, Jaquiz Rodgers as a running back is great. Jameis Winston, I think, is tremendous. And then, of course, that wonderful tight end that they have down in Tampa Bay. I love what they have there for the Buccaneers. Be really interesting to see how the Patriots handle them here tonight on the road in that game, no less. And then, obviously, people are asking about Atlanta and losing at home to Buffalo. The Bills have some solid playmakers there. I mean, you look at LaShawn McCoy, you look at Jordan Matthews, who they traded for to get him, and then, of course, Tyrod Taylor, who's really started to do some fun things. But again, Buffalo I look at, and the biggest thing that they have done, if you look at the numbers, and I know football's a sport where you can't really look at the numbers that much, but Buffalo is a team that their wins, they've been outgained offensively. Their offense hasn't done much, and they were outgained again against Atlanta. The difference was the Buffalo defense, which is what they're going to preach and what they're going to really put everything on, really helped them out simply because they were able to win the turnover battle. And that's the biggest difference. If you can win the turnover battle, how many yards you gain or how many yards you give up doesn't matter that much. It's a bend, don't break mentality there in Buffalo, and there's not much really to help them out with. So I wonder if they're going to keep that mentality throughout or if they can really just kind of hone in. I'm not going to be that impressed with them this week if they beat Cincinnati. They should beat Cincinnati. They're not a good team. I don't like the Bengals at all, even though they do have an okay defense. Bengals coming off a big win over Cleveland, but it's Cleveland. No offense to them. So that's really not that impressive to me for them. So I look at Buffalo to have an easy time with Cincinnati this weekend, and then we'll see from there, because when they actually really start to get into the meat of their schedule, and they've got to play the Patriots twice. They lost to the Panthers 9-3. Yeah, they beat the Broncos and the Falcons in their last 2 games, which are big, but the Raiders are going to be without Derek Carr, so that game I don't really expect much for them coming up on the 29th of October, but you look at the Buccaneers, that'll be a tough game for them. The Saints will be tough for them. The Chiefs, the Patriots, twice. So we'll see what happens with the Bills. They may make a wild card. I might be wrong in thinking that they miss the playoffs, but they definitely have a shot, especially with that defense, as long as they can keep up that bend, don't break mentality. But I think at some point that's going to really kind of come back to bite them a little bit. And then I think the biggest question is going to be, how have you bought into the Chiefs yet? That's what everybody's wanting to know. Have you bought in to the 4-0 Kansas City Chiefs? And I'm almost there. I really am. I think they've got a great dynamic offensively. They've got a very strong defense as well. I thought losing Eric Berry would be really difficult for them. But for Kansas City to come out the way they did in that Monday night game against Washington and come away with that victory was great. Alex Smith, close to 300 yards again. Kareem Hunt is just an absolute stud. And when your tight end, Travis Kelce, is your leading receiver with 111 receiving yards in a game, that's really impressive from an offensive standpoint. So Chiefs in Houston this weekend on Sunday Night Football. That'll be interesting to see. The Texans have been on fire. Deshaun Watson has gone absolutely nuts these last couple of games. So that'll be interesting to watch. I think Kansas City, as you look forward for them for their schedule, the Steelers next week, if they beat the Steelers at home, then I'll really, really start to buy in, depending on how they do against the Texans here. If they go out and wipe the floor with the Texans, I might buy in automatically. If they have a squeaker or if they lose, I'll go back to just being a little bit more tempered expectations about the Chiefs. But they have been easily the surprise and one of the better teams, obviously, in the NFL here so far this season. So a lot of fun. Of course, it all starts tonight on CBS when New England heads on the road to take on Tampa Bay. We'll see if Tampa Bay come up with a nice win if the Patriots can really kind of right the ship, or if maybe these primetime games will be a struggle for the Patriots this year. Who knows? But we'll see how all of that pans out, obviously, over the weekend. And, of course, if you have any questions about NFL, any other sport, whatever it is, don't forget to submit them. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at PressRowPHM, or you can find us on Facebook at Press Row Podcast, Public House Media. Submit your questions. We love hearing from you guys throughout the year as well. Anything sports related, really any questions that you may have in general as we move forward here on Press Row. I'm Christian. I'm also happy to have you guys here with us. We'll head down into the college ranks now, where we've got some really fun, exciting games coming up here. Things have really started to get interesting in the rankings, of course. Every time the rankings come out each week, we're closing in on the college football playoff rankings coming out in just a couple of weeks. But when you look at the way things pan out right now, is Clemson the number one team? Should they be the number one team? Even though they are ranked number 2 in both polls, they are a team that has done incredibly well. Does the SEC still have the right to claim themselves as the top conference? Has the Big Ten surpassed them in that? And then do we have any real Heisman runaways? He's Josh Parcell, host and founder of College Football Country, the podcast, as well as CFBcountry.com, friend of the show. He joins us back now. And Josh, I'll start with this. You brought it up on your podcast earlier this week. There's a little bit of panic setting down there in the SEC. A couple of coaches on the hot seat.
Yeah, surprisingly, none of them have lost their jobs yet. It seems like this has been the storyline every Sunday morning. We wake up and we check our phones and we wonder which coach lost his job this week, and somehow they all are hanging on by a thread. Butch Jones obviously seems like the most likely guy who's going to be fired. We thought it was going to be after the loss to Georgia. Maybe they're waiting until the end of the season, but Tennessee came into the season with a ton of tension, a lot of uncertainty, and some optimism, I think. But last year when they fell short, I think it was only a matter of time before Butch Jones met his demise. And they just look like it's a team that's quit on its coach. I mean, they had an opportunity with a home game with Peyton Manning back in town in Knoxville on Saturday to try and play for some pride after that ugly game against UMass 2 weeks ago, and it just didn't happen. And now losing 41-0 to an SEC rival who's in its second year with a new head coach. Clearly the Georgia Bulldogs the gap is just so wide now. They've far surpassed what Tennessee has been able to do in 5 years under Butch Jones. It's clearly time for a change in Knoxville. It's only a matter of time before it happens.
Well, and that's the interesting part about this is if the SEC, and we talked about it when we had you on a couple weeks ago, if the SEC has its right to claim itself as the top conference in college football, what does this kind of unrest do throughout the conference when you have so many coaches who are on the hot seat? What does that do for the reputation of the SEC?
Well, it's kind of interesting that you say that because, I mean, really the SEC over the last decade has just evolved into this colossal force of nature based on Nick Saban's dynasty at Alabama, what Urban Meyer did at Florida back before he left for Ohio State. And it seemed like the rest of the SEC kind of rode the coattails of those two teams. LSU had a couple of good runs. The league was good, but Tennessee didn't do anything to contribute to that. Missouri has done nothing. Auburn made it to a couple national championship games. Texas A&M has done virtually nothing. So you really look at the SEC as a whole. It's kind of created this pressure among all the schools in the conference to be as good as Alabama or to be as good as what Florida used to be. And I mean, reality says only a team or two can be that good, yet every school has these unrealistic expectations. And that's where you see guys like Kevin Sumlin, who's won 8 or 9 games most seasons, Butch Jones, who's won 9 games in several seasons. It's just not good enough. And when Alabama continues to be as good as it's been, they have shown no signs of slowing down. It creates so much pressure. It's why guys like Les Miles and Mark Richt, two coaches who may ultimately be in the Hall of Fame, certainly will go down as some of the better coaches in the history of those schools, got fired. It's just, I mean, business as usual in the SEC. If you're not winning championships, those schools are ready for the next big thing.
He's Josh Parcell, founder and host of College Football Country, the podcast, and CFBcountry.com. So, Josh, if we move away from this narrative that the SEC is the number one conference in college football, is there a league that has that right to claim now? I mean, you look at obviously you've got the Big Ten with 4 teams in the top 10. You look at the Big 12 with West Virginia, TCU, Oklahoma, all ranked in the top 25. And then you look at the Pac-12, which has some talented teams in Washington State, USC. And then, of course, ACC has Clemson, the defending national champions, at number 2, still 5-0, with a number of quality wins.
Yeah, I think the Big Ten probably has the best case. I mean, they have 4 teams in the top 10, and Ohio State coming in back into the top 10 this week. You got 3 in one division in Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, all probably top 10 teams. Yeah, I mean, the Big Ten probably is the best right now, but also it depends on how you phrase the question, because at the top it's the Big Ten, but as far as depth is concerned, I mean, the bottom of the Big Ten is an absolute joke. So it depends. I mean, I actually really like the Big 12, too. I think the Big 12 is very deep. You look at that conference, and I think there's 5 or 6 teams that could genuinely say that they think they have a chance to win the conference right now. Obviously, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, TCU are kind of at the top right now, but West Virginia has a chance on Saturday against TCU to beat the Horned Frogs down there in Fort Worth. I give them a very good chance to win that game. You have Texas, who's going to get better as the season goes on. They obviously played extremely well early in the year against USC, coming up just short. They're getting better as the season goes on. Kansas State's a tough team. So there's a lot of really good teams in that Big 12. I think that league is the deepest. It just may not have that great superpower team like the SEC has with Alabama or the ACC has with Clemson. It's just a deeper league, just no great team in that conference.
You mentioned West Virginia, TCU. We're going to touch on that game in just a little bit, probably the best matchup of top 25 teams here this weekend. But I want to touch on Clemson again real quick, because the Tigers 5-0, number 2 right now in the AP rankings, but receiving 17 first-place votes, wins over a ranked Auburn squad at home in a tough game, and then wins on the road against Louisville and Virginia Tech, 2 ranked conference opponents. Where do the Tigers rank for you? And if they aren't number 1, how close are they to Alabama at number 1?
Yeah, so I think on paper, as far as the teams they've beaten, Clemson deserves to be number 1. If you ask me who I think the best team in college football is, I think it's Alabama. I think what they've been able to do against the teams they've played so far, I mean, I think it's like 125-3 the last 2 weeks against a couple average SEC teams, but just, I mean, thoroughly dominant. Alabama's probably the best team. They have the most talent. But Clemson has beaten 3 top 15 teams, the first team in the history of college football to do it in September. So you got to give a ton of credit to Clemson for not only winning those games, winning 2 of them on the road, and doing so with the new quarterback. This Tiger team has reloaded several times under Dabo Swinney. I mean, you go back to some of the guys they lost years ago. I mean, going all the way back to C.J. Spiller and Taj Boyd and DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, they've lost elite NFL talent and replaced it without skipping a beat. But this was different. This was Deshaun Watson. This was the quarterback. This was maybe your best player in school history. That's a totally different challenge. And Kelly Bryant has stepped in and done what he's needed to do. I was in Blacksburg for that game on Saturday night, and Kelly Bryant won the game with his legs. I mean, Virginia Tech defense played pretty well, held the running backs in check, really covered extremely well. I mean, Bryant was not super accurate as a passer. It was the plays he was able to make with his legs, either on designed runs or when the plays broke down, that was able to give Clemson enough of an edge to win that game. And now the schedule only gets easier for Clemson. They still have NC State coming up in a couple weeks. That's a challenge for them. South Carolina at the end of the season. But they've passed all of the hard tests now. This is a front-loaded schedule for them. I mean, it's really hard to imagine Clemson losing before the end of the season. I don't think that in the minds of the pollsters, whether it's the playoff committee or the AP poll or whatever, I don't think the Tigers are going to have enough ammo to pass Alabama for number 1 as long as they both keep winning. But it's not really going to matter, because as long as they both win, they're on a collision course for a 3rd straight championship game. The first time, really, I can remember, Christian, since 2005 when Alabama and USC, or I'm not Alabama, sorry, Texas and USC were clearly the top 2 teams in the country, really from the beginning of the season. Nobody's gone wire to wire since then. Clemson started the year at number 5, but by week 2 or 3, they were already up to number 2. I mean, we know these are the 2 best teams in college football. It's been a long time since we can say that this early in the year.
Before we go any further, I want to touch on another team in the ACC. They started out the year ranked preseason number 3. Season opening loss to Alabama, the injury to their quarterback, Florida State having to come from behind this past weekend against Wake Forest in the 4th quarter to win, to avoid 0-3. They've had a couple of games rescheduled because of hurricane issues, but how difficult of a year is this going to be for Jimbo Fisher?
It's going to be a struggle, no doubt about it. I mean, they got the win over Wake Forest. Blackman had a nice drive at the end of the game, threw the game-winning touchdown pass there in the final minutes, but he's completing 55% of his passes. I mean, Florida State's really got to rely on its defense to win games. The running game has also not been what we thought it was going to be. Cam Akers was supposed to be this otherworldly running back. He was the number 1 running back recruit in the country. We thought he would step in. He would replace Dalvin Cook. I don't know where people got that idea. they're 3 games into the season. He hasn't been in the end zone yet. So for Florida State, they don't really have the weapons on offense right now that give me any confidence that they're going to be able to win 10 or 11 games with James Blackman at quarterback. I love that defense. I think this could have been a special year for them if Francois was healthy. But, yeah, it's going to be really, really tough for them. I don't see them beating Clemson for sure in a few weeks. They still have Miami this weekend. I think the Hurricanes beat them in Tallahassee. They have Louisville, Duke in the month of October. I mean, none of those games are guarantees at this point. And it's a shame because they could have been a much better team. But when you lose your quarterback in college football, it's very few teams are like Georgia where they can just replace their starting quarterback and not skip a beat. And Florida State clearly was not one of those teams this season.
Definitely a tough road to hoe there for the Seminoles. Obviously, Miami this weekend and then Florida on the road at the end of the year. He's Josh Parcell, host and founder of College Football Country, the podcast, as well as CFBcountry.com, joining us here on Press Row. And Josh, we're at that point now in the season. We're closing in on the first college football playoff rankings, but we're also starting to really focus in on who could be some Heisman candidates here. And I don't know your thoughts on this young man. Obviously, I think he is very talented, but Saquon Barkley, who only has a little less than 600 rushing yards so far this year, the running back for Penn State, why is he considered by so many to be the leading candidate right now, despite, just like I said, a little less than 600 rushing yards?
Well, first and foremost, he had his biggest game on a national stage in prime time against Iowa. So when everyone was able to see what he did against the Hawkeyes in that nationally televised game, that's naturally going to give you a little bit of a boost. I mean, you compare that to Bryce Love at Stanford, who has better numbers this year, certainly on the ground, but has done it in front of virtually nobody. Saquon Barkley is going to get more attention, and the Heisman Trophy is as much a product of the media hype as anything. So Barkley's going to be at the front right now. He's going to have opportunities, too, later this month when they play Michigan and Ohio State to really, take the Heisman race and run away with it if he wants to. I think it's a little early and premature to anoint Saquon Barkley as the runaway Heisman favorite. Obviously, Baker Mayfield has been off to a great start as well. But there are a lot of other names. It's super early, and think about this, Christian. I believe it was 2 years ago, Leonard Fournette had all but won the Heisman at this point. And quarterbacks have had great months in September, but let's talk about a running back. Leonard Fournette it seemed like a shoo-in to win the Heisman. And then he went down and played Alabama late October, early November, was completely shut down, and wasn't even a finalist to the award when it was all said and done. So it's easy to have these conversations now in October, but give it some time. If Barkley goes out against Michigan or Ohio State, 2 excellent rushing defenses in back-to-back weeks. If either one of those teams or both hold him under 100 yards, Penn State splits those games or loses both, Barkley won't even be a finalist for the Heisman. So he has a chance, but let's pump the brakes a little bit on the hype train. He's a plus 125 favorite. That's way, way too short for him right now.
Yeah, you mentioned Bryce Love there, and again, just 5 games played, over 1,000 rushing yards as well, the running back for Stanford. But 2 guys that I feel like aren't getting enough talk in this Heisman race are both quarterbacks, and they both play in Oklahoma. That's Baker Mayfield and Mason Rudolph. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like those 2 guys translate so well to the professional game. And to me, I think they're some of the best players in college football.
Yeah, and, kind of going back to the point about the games that you play down the stretch, you have to be playing in huge, huge games in late October and November so that you are in front of the eyes of the committee. You're playing in important games. Both of those guys are going to have chances against one another, no less, early November when they play each other in the Bedlam game. But going back to what I talked about, how deep the Big 12 is, that plays to the advantage of those quarterbacks in the Big 12 because you're probably going to see several top 25 ranked games that are going to be on national TV for all of those quarterbacks. Mayfield, Mason Rudolph, Will Grier, another guy who could sneak into this Heisman race if he continues to play well. So, both of those guys in the Big 12, they have opportunities. Now, one of them is going to have to win games. If they start knocking each other off and you have a bunch of 9-3 and 10-2 teams, nobody's going to be winning the Heisman from the Big 12. But if one of those guys can kind of take the lead and lead his team to an 11-win or even a 12-win season, then, there's a really good chance that the Heisman winner comes out of the Big 12.
He's Josh Parcell, host and founder of College Football Country, the podcast, as well as CFBcountry.com. Josh, I'll leave you with this. We've only got 2 top 25 matchups here this weekend. Thursday night, 17th-ranked Louisville heads to Raleigh to take on 24th-ranked NC State. And then, as we mentioned earlier, number 23, West Virginia in Fort Worth to take on the 8th-ranked TCU Horned Frogs. What do you think about those 2 matchups? And then is there another one that maybe kind of piques your interest here this weekend?
I mean, the Louisville-NC State game is a great opportunity for the Wolfpack. I mean, obviously they lose the season opener to South Carolina, and you wonder, is this the same story with NC State all over again? This is a big opportunity. We have seen ranked teams go into Carter Finley Stadium at night and lose. This Louisville team is far from invincible. You saw them exposed on the defensive side against Clemson. We know the Clemson Tigers offense is good, but I don't think it's great. And for NC State, if they can contain Lamar Jackson, and they've got a great defensive line, they're going to be able to score points on the Cardinals. They're a slight underdog right now, 2.5-point underdog. That's going to be a neck-and-neck game. That may be the best game of the weekend. And a huge opportunity for NC State. Again, the expectations were so high for this team before the season. You had some people even going so far as to call this a dark horse playoff team. I think that might have been a little bit of a stretch, but at the same point, it spoke to just what people thought the feeling was for the Wolfpack. They need to win games like this. You cannot continue to play games like this and lose. This is a ton of pressure on NC State on Thursday night. I don't have a pick in that game. I think it comes down to the wire, but just know how important it is for NC State. As far as West Virginia and TCU, I like the Mountaineers in this game. I think West Virginia goes in and pulls off the upset. It's crazy to me that this team is almost a 2-touchdown underdog. I think both of these offenses are toe-to-toe. I don't know that either offense is better than the other. TCU maybe has a little bit better defense, but I think the Mountaineers defense is pretty good as well. And in the Big 12, these types of games are going to get into shootouts. I tend to side in these games with who I think the better quarterback is, who I trust more to make game-winning plays at the end. I think that guy is Will Grier. Will Grier, to me, it takes better care of the football. Kenny Hill has 23 interceptions in his career going back to Texas A&M and last year at TCU. I think that he makes a couple mistakes in this game, and I think West Virginia capitalizes. I love them catching 12.5 points, but I like them to win outright. Game day is going to be in Fort Worth. I think the Mountaineers get this win. I think they play spoiler to a couple teams. If not, it would not shock me if West Virginia wins the Big 12. They may be the 4th or 5th ranked team right now in that conference. Do not sleep on the Mountaineers. That's a good football team.
Josh, as always, I appreciate the time, buddy. Enjoy the weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's Josh Parcell. You can catch him on the podcast, Country Football Country, the podcast, as well as CFBcountry.com. And listen, I mean, we've always talked about this, and we talked about this with Dan Wolken of USA Today before the season even began. It's so difficult to pick a Heisman Trophy winner this early in the year, even though we are 6 weeks in, and most teams will be halfway done with their season after this weekend, if not more so. But and Josh, I think, is absolutely right. It's the media darling. I mean, you look at last year, Lamar Jackson was the runaway favorite by the end of September, and he really kind of fell off at the end. Somehow he was still able to hold on to win the Heisman, even though a lot of people, myself included, thought Deshaun Watson had a much better close to the season, obviously winning a national championship. But it's amazing to look at places like ESPN where they have their experts ranking Heisman Trophy winners. And just after the past game for Sam Darnold, who is believed to be by many the number 1 overall pick in the draft next year, he's not even on the list anymore just because of that loss on the road to Washington State. Meanwhile, Luke Falk, the quarterback for Wazoo, has jumped up to number 4. I mean, yeah, Saquon Barkley had a great game against Iowa, but he hasn't really done much. He can do a lot of different things, receiving, running the ball, obviously kick returns and stuff like that. But you look at him so far this year, and combined from scrimmage, when you talk about just running and receiving, combined, he has less yardage than Bryce Love does, the running back at Stanford, rushing the ball. Bryce Love is an incredible running back. Again, over 1,000 rushing yards in just 5 games, 8 touchdowns as well. He went nuts against Arizona State, 300 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. Saquon Barkley, meanwhile, he took the opening kickoff back. Yeah, he threw a touchdown, but just 56 rushing yards. That, to me, doesn't really translate that well. I don't see Saquon Barkley as the Heisman winner. Personally, I've been on the Baker Mayfield train for over a year now. I love the way he plays quarterback. I know he's off this week, or I'm sorry, I know he was off this past week, but Iowa State and then next week Texas, 2 big games for him. And again, as Josh Parcell mentioned, it's the media. If you can get out in front of these these big audiences and have a show-out performance like Baker Mayfield did against Ohio State, like Saquon Barkley did against Iowa, you're going to have a chance to win a couple awards there. And I don't think Baker Mayfield is getting the love he deserves right now. That'll change when he plays Texas, when he plays Oklahoma State, obviously, and if he's able to make it into the college football playoff. So I'll go on record right now saying I think Baker Mayfield is the best quarterback. I think he's the best player in the country as well. And I am fine saying that as we sit here October 5th. If that changes in a couple of weeks, I would love to see who is able to do that. But the question becomes who can actually do that type of thing. And it'll be interesting to see what these guys actually do, too, because Saquon Barkley and Bryce Love, both running backs, even Lamar Jackson, all three of them are juniors. So do they come out after this year and go into the draft next year, or do they stay and come back for college for a senior year? We'll see what happens. I think a lot of that obviously has to do with potential for winning a championship. Saquon Barkley at Penn State, will they be good enough to win a national championship last year if they don't make the playoff this year, if they lose? Same with Bryce Love at Stanford. Same with Lamar Jackson at Louisville. So we'll see what happens, but Lamar's got a primetime game tonight when his 17th ranked Cardinals go to NC State. We'll see if he's able to show out there on a national stage, and that'll just be another way that things kind of progress in who is that front runner in the Heisman championship, Heisman race, I should say. You're on Press Row. I'm Christian Heimel. We're so happy to have you guys a part of us. Broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network. Don't forget to like us, subscribe, rate, review, share us with your friends and family. You can find us all over the place. Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com, Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio as well. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at PressRowPHM, as well as on Facebook at Press Row Podcast, Public House Media. You can also email the show, pressrowphm@gmail.com, for any and all questions that you may have that you would want answered on the show. As mentioned, a lot of fun coming up here in October. I love this month. There's just so much great stuff going on in the world of sports. So many great games, obviously. You have got football in full swing, both college and professional. You have the NHL and the NBA starting back up. You have Major League Baseball in the thick of its playoff race. A lot of fun stuff happening in the month of October. I absolutely love it. And before we get to Major League Baseball and everything else with Whitney McIntosh, MLB desk writer for SB Nation, I want to touch on a couple of other fun and great things that I don't know if you guys have seen it this week or if you've paid attention, but how about last night, the season opener for hockey, and boy, was it a great season opener. You had some great games. Obviously, the Penguins hoisting their Stanley Cup championship, putting up another banner, and then an absolute insane game between them and the St. Louis Blues there in Pittsburgh. Blues have a 2-1 lead, a 3-2 lead heading into the third. Penguins come back and they tie it up at 4 apiece. Blues were up 4-2 at one point, and the Penguins come back, tie it, and then ultimately fall in overtime. It's a heck of a way to start the season. Flyers and the Sharks had a really fun game there as well on the West Coast. That game was 3-2 at one point in favor of the Flyers, and they come away with a 5-3 victory. So we got treated to some good hockey to start the season. Going to be a lot of fun. We'll touch on that a little bit more as we go throughout the year, but we'll see exactly what happens. Going to be a fun season. The Penguins, I don't want to get into predictions because I'll be 100% honest. I'm not the most hockey savvy person. I love it. I'm fun. I love having fun and watching it, but I don't know exactly what to think about a lot of teams. A little bit of a surprise to me, at least, to see the Toronto Maple Leafs put up a big number against the Winnipeg Jets last night, 7-2 in their opener, but we'll see what happens as hockey really getting underway here this week, and it was a lot of fun. Preseason basketball underway as well. We'll see if the Penguins can repeat, or three-peat, I should say, or we'll see if the Predators can get back to the championship. We'll see exactly what happens. It'll be a lot of fun to watch. And then I do want to give a special shout out. I don't know how many of you actually watch, how many of you care, but this was a lot of fun. The WNBA Finals Game 5 winner-take-all between the Minnesota Lynx and the LA Sparks last night, where Minnesota coming away with a victory, 85-76, as they win their fourth franchise championship in the league's 21-year history. And this was great for them. And if you have a chance, check out Michelle Vopel's article on ESPNW.com about how really the victory in the game made the whole league a winner there in the WNBA, mainly because as you look at it, it was very similar to last year almost, where Minnesota and LA, again, in the championship meeting, Minnesota fell behind 2-1, beat LA in LA. Last year, the Lynx lost at home in Game 5 on a buzzer beater with 3 seconds left, but this year they win it at home. Fun little subplot there. Lindsay Whalen for the Minnesota Lynx, the point guard, played at Williams Arena, which is University of Minnesota. When she was in college, she played there, was a Golden Gopher. So it was a lot of fun. To watch. I was watching the game a little bit last night. Maya Moore is an incredibly talented player. I've seen her play all through college. Had the pleasure of watching her, individually, watching her in person. It's a lot of fun. Simone Augustus, I think, is a very tremendous talent. Obviously, Lindsay Whalen and whatnot. But if you don't really watch the WNBA, just understand how much fun that was. It's competitive, it's exciting, and the crowds are insane, especially in Minnesota and LA. Insane crowds for these finals. Really enjoying it, really right in the heat of it all. A lot of fun there to be able to watch that. So if you had a chance to watch, you were treated to some exciting basketball. And if you didn't, go check out the highlights and maybe check out the WNBA next summer when it enters its 22nd season. You're on Press Row. I'm Christian Heimel. So happy to have you guys here with us. It is October. That means that it is playoff season. It's Major League Baseball's postseason here. We had two incredibly exciting wild card games earlier this week with the Yankees and the Twins, as well as Arizona and Colorado. And listen, all credit to the Twins and to the Rockies for getting to that point. You saw, pitching struggle in both of those games, but for the Twins, this is what's really amazing. The Twins and the Yankees, both teams were supposed to be in a rebuilding year. The Yankees peaked a year early, obviously, but this just to show you what the future is for Minnesota. Team that lost 100 games a year ago and then makes the playoffs as a wild card, into the wild card game. That's just tremendous for them. They are insanely talented. Byron Buxton is a great talent. I'm so happy to see Joe Mauer have that opportunity there to get back into the postseason and really fight for more postseason. Hopefully he gets to keep doing that. Irvin Santana, his struggles, really, really kind of surprised everybody. Same with Severino. Nobody thought that Luis Severino was going to really struggle that much. But two really exciting wild card games. And then you look at the Arizona Rockies game. I mean, how great was it to watch Randy Johnson there on the edge of his seat throughout that entire game, which was a lot of fun. I mean, Ketel Marte was impressive with a couple of triples, I should say. A lot of fun. So now we get into the actual series here. And listen, everybody wants to talk about and complain that you shouldn't play 162 games just to have your playoff decided by one game or your postseason fate decided by one game. Isn't that the most exciting part of it? Isn't that why we love the playoffs, for those do-or-die situations, why we love Game 7? Nobody wants to see sweeps. Nobody wants to see blowouts. You love Game 7. And you get to start with this one-game playoff. You get to start it right there with a Game 7 in all intents and purposes. So I like the one-game format. If it goes 3 games, I wouldn't be upset, and you turn that into a 3-game series, and the divisional series is a 5-game, followed by the championship and World Series that are 7 games. I wouldn't be upset about it, but there's no better excitement than that do-or-die feeling, and you got that this week, in 2 really good games. So now we actually start the postseason in earnest here beginning today. Of course, the Red Sox at Houston, 4 o'clock Eastern start, and then the Yankees are in Cleveland, the defending AL champions, looking to get back to the Fall Classic. That's at 7:30 tonight. Whitney McIntosh is an MLB desk writer for SB Nation. She joins us now here on Press Row. Whitney, thanks a lot for the time.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, Whitney, before we start talking about playoffs, this season really kind of got engulfed by 2 pretty talented home run hitters this season. Obviously, Aaron Judge, a rookie record, most home runs at Yankee Stadium, surpassing Babe Ruth. And then Miami Marlins slugger Giancarlo Stanton nearly getting to 60 there and just putting on a show in the second half. Which one of those seasons was probably more impressive to you?
Well, full disclosure, I am a Red Sox fan, so I'm automatically going to lead towards Giancarlo, but it would be, a little disingenuous to say that I didn't enjoy Judge at all. I mean, who really could have seen this coming? We saw a little bit of what he could do last year, but this is just next level. But I think just the whole season, big picture, full picture, I was more impressed with Giancarlo. He's he only has a few supporting characters on that team. They didn't make the playoffs. He's an older player that hasn't really done something like this in a few years. Could be on his way out the door in Miami and still manage to, put up numbers like this. And I just think that was more impressive, especially when you do consider Aaron Judge's slight, all-star slump, even though Yankees fans get really sensitive when you talk about the all-star slump.
They certainly do, and you and I, kindred spirits there, Whitney, as a Boston Red Sox fan. So let's talk about our Sox here as they take on the Houston Astros, a team that is very talented, obviously top to bottom lineup-wise, went out and got Justin Verlander there to be able to make them that much more threatening. But what do you think about these two teams, not only matching up in this series, but their chances in October in general?
I mean, the Astros just have so many weapons. You know, they did shore up their pitching with Verlander. Their bullpen has looked better in the second half. And, of course, they have the offense with, George Springer, Altuve, all of those guys. So it's a little worrying for Red Sox, even though they've shown that they can be a comeback team and beat anyone on a good day. But the Astros, I mean, and what a story it would be with Harvey and Houston and coming together like that. But I just think the Astros are a really fun team, and they have so many weapons that if you shut one down, you're still going to have to deal with 2 or 3 more of what their team can present to you for a 5 or 7 game series.
It seems as though these two staffs are very talented pitchers, but almost unproven pitching. Chris Sale yet to pitch in the playoffs in his career. David Price has always struggled in the playoffs. And then Houston, outside of Justin Verlander, you don't have many guys on that rotation or in that staff with really extensive postseason pitching experience.
Exactly. You can look at these guys and say, well, they're confident and they've had great years and they're ready to go to the playoffs. And you can be as ready as anyone in the world to go to the playoffs, and then you get there, and, you know, things can just fall apart. And we've seen that already with all 4 starting pitchers in the wild card games, whether they had playoff experience or not. No one made it 4 innings. So starting pitching already has been a little bit of a shaky prospect for every team, and those are teams that had literally nothing to lose but the game, and they could use whoever they needed and could be as confident as they wanted. And now we're getting into strategy and how you start games and how important it is for a starting pitcher to go deep and shut opposing teams down. And we're looking at, like you said, 2 rosters that don't have that much playoff experience, even though they have, maybe some Cy Young candidates and things like that. But the experience, it might not be the only thing that matters, but it does still matter. And so we'll kind of see how that goes, especially starting today.
She's Whitney McIntosh, MLB desk writer at SB Nation, and touch on the other American League Divisional Series, Yankees and the defending AL champion Cleveland Indians. It almost feels like a foregone conclusion that the Indians are going to get back to the World Series here, especially with the way they've played these last 6 weeks. Is there anything that you can see as to why the Yankees would be the team advancing out of this divisional series?
I mean, I think Yankees pitching has to be incredibly on point. They would have to be completely shut down. Don't let Francisco Lindor do anything. Don't let Jose Ramirez do anything. And I think that's very tricky and also very tough to do for 3 games out of 5. I don't see it happening personally. There's, of course, all of Cleveland's pitchers could fall apart, and Corey Kluber could let up 7 runs in 2 innings, or, there's so many baseball things that could happen. But going in, the smart money's on Cleveland. There's probably no way that the Yankees can figure them out so quickly. As we saw with the Red Sox last year, they were a tough team last year. They've only gotten better, and they've also only gotten more intimidating. And, talking about playoff experience, those young Yankees players, yeah, they did great in that wild card game, but again, a series is a different story, and we'll have to see how their base running decisions are and how their, steeliness at the plate is, and depending on that. So, I'd be interested to see if the youth kind of makes any big difference like they did in the wild card game, but I also don't think it really will matter at the end of the day.
Let's flip things over to the National League and touch on Diamondbacks and Dodgers. In Arizona, a great wild card game against Colorado. Really, both wild card games pretty exciting, but Arizona, to be able to do what they did at home and have the success that they've had this year against a Dodgers team that really has kind of fallen off the face of the earth since August hit. What are the biggest keys for both of these teams here in this first round?
I mean, yeah, like you just mentioned, the Dodgers kind of had a drop off late in the season. The Diamondbacks showed them what they got at the end of the season, and the Diamondbacks also just showed everybody that they have a lot of offense when they need it. And we kind of, we knew that already. JD Martinez, they got the offense covered. I think they should be very worried about their starting pitching right now. Zach Greinke didn't make it 4 innings. They had to burn Robbie Ray, who might have to, shift down in the rotation even further, or maybe not even be used in the NLDS if it, tilts that way and they get it done in a 3 or 4 games. But I think that's worrisome. And I'm also a little worried that they might rely on their recent history and not their, season-long history. They've had a good record over the season, but later, more than earlier. The Dodgers are not something to be messed with in the playoffs, especially when you look at last year's, mix of success and failures, but what they can do when they have their heart set on it and their pitching is, clicking. I think this is going to be a really interesting series. I think it's a complete toss-up, more than some people might think. The Dodgers fell off, but they also had an amazing season. And I don't want to underestimate that. And the Diamondbacks have looked good of late. So it's which part of whose season comes forward first, I guess.
We talk about the Dodgers really falling off there in the second half. It's almost the exact opposite for the defending champs, the Cubs. They really turned it on in the All-Star break, and now they get the Nationals, a team that somewhat injured Bryce Harper. Not sure if they're going to have Max Scherzer available. This is almost a perfect storm for the Cubbies to get back into the Fall Classic.
Yeah, and I'm kind of referring that series in my head to the pressure series, the pressure on LDS, because you've got their defending champions coming off a kind of rough season, missing some of the veterans they had last year. John Lackey might be retiring after this year. They're a little bit shaky. They did look good later on, but they're, they have their World Series hangover, and now they have, repeat pressure, kind of where the 05 Sox were, like, oh, we won one, now we have to win them all, obviously. And the Nationals have never won a playoff series. And if they're going to win one, now is probably their best shot against a Cubs team that has weaknesses, that gets shaky if they go down early sometimes. But over there, they're under immense pressure. The Bryce Harper window is closing a little bit. He's kind of injured. Max Scherzer is a little bit injured. It's questionable, and that's a city that really wants them to win a playoff series, and they never ever have. So I think it's two teams, one that is trying to win again, and one that's just trying to win something. And we'll see kind of who handles that pressure best and can pull it out.
All right, Whitney, if you can, and it's a struggle for me every year, especially when the Red Sox are playing in October, but if we can pull the fan bias away, what are the two teams that you see there in the Fall Classic, and who ultimately hoists the World Series championship?
Well, I went a little bit chalk this year in my predictions. You can also find them on the site. The whole staff, did some as well, and funnily enough, the only 3 people that chose the Red Sox in the wild card or in the Astro series were the Red Sox fans, but we will see how that goes. But for the fall, for the final matchup, I went a little bit shocked. I went Cubs Indians again, and I went with the Indians coming out on top, just because they've looked so good. But I do think the Cubs have a decent path in the NL to get back there. I just don't know if they can pull it out again. But I'd sure love to see that rematch and see how people come out.
She's Whitney McIntosh, MLB desk writer for SB Nation. And Whitney, not only is it great baseball in the postseason, but it's a chance to see some front runners for some awards here. You've got potential for Aaron Judge and Jose Altuve, 2 AL MVP candidates to go against each other. Chris Sale against Corey Kluber, potentially the 2 front runners in the American League Cy Young. You mentioned J.D. Martinez on the National League side of things. Charlie Blackmon and Nolan Arenado were both there in that wild card game as well. And then a number of guys for the NL Cy Young. Who do you see having the right to hold a couple of individual awards if they're unable to win a championship?
For AL MVP, listen, I'm not somebody that thinks that a Rookie of the Year can't also be MVP. I'd say give them, all of the awards, or that a Cy Young winner can't also be MVP in the right circumstances. But I do think the split this year should be Altuve, AL MVP, Judge, AL Rookie of the Year. I just think Altuve has a more complete game. He's, he's not just a hitter. He has a lot more in his arsenal right now and this year than Aaron Judge. And I also think it would be hilarious for someone that short to win it. But I do think it's his. On the NL side, like you said, there are so many people to choose from. People like Paul Goldschmidt, who would have thought at the beginning of this year, kind of mixed in with those the usual suspects like Chris Bryant, Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado. I think in a better year, Giancarlo Stanton could have gotten it. I don't know how voters will go with it this year because of how Miami looked. But I'm tempted to say Nolan Arenado just because I'm wondering how much, his teammates will split the vote a little bit. I'm wondering how much people have Cubs fatigue and won't vote for, Chris Bryant JD Martinez got traded in the middle of the year, and his second half was the flashier one. So I think there's a lot of moving factors in the NL, which I'm wondering how that will actually affect voting. But I feel like Nolan Arenado, he had an amazing year at third, some highlight plays, but also just an incredible defensive year stats-wise, and a great year at the plate. So I think he'd be kind of a fun choice, a surprise choice based on what people might have thought at the beginning of the year, but a worthy one, especially with so many guys in the mix.
Do you see anybody as a runaway for the Cy Young, or is it kind of too close to call in both the AL and NL?
I think Sale's shaky end of the year may have hurt him with voting, especially because sometimes, the Writers Association voters have a bit of a recency bias, and that's not their fault. You're voting on a lot of guys, a lot of teams that you don't have time to watch, 162 games of all of them. So Chris Sale had a couple shaky starts late in the season, wondering, or I would assume that would affect his voting a little bit. So I think Corey Kluber's got it locked up. He had an amazing year. On the NL side, again, the NL has more guys in the mix. But I'm tempted to think that with Scherzer injured again, Greinke hasn't been lights out all year. There's a lot of conversation down in Arizona that he's not a true ace. I think Clayton Kershaw could pull through with it, even though he was also injured. So that's kind of an interesting race. It's just kind of the race of injured pitchers out west. But my money's on Kershaw. He's the flashier name. He still had a great year. And then you're looking at Scherzer, who had kind of some weird injury issues, some later injury issues, and Greinke, who, wasn't lights out. He was not, 100% lock-in vote.
Whitney McIntosh, MLB desk writer at SB Nation. Thanks so much for the time, Whitney, and enjoy the postseason.
You as well.
It's Whitney McIntosh, MLB desk writer, SB Nation. Good stuff there from her. And yeah, listen, this is the fun part. This is why I love October. You never know. You can have as many predictions as you want, but it's so difficult to really kind of sit there and try to figure out who is going to be. I mean, it really does feel, though, like Cleveland is destined to be back in the World Series here this year. They have, I think, the best all-around team. Their lineup is tremendous, even though the Astros lineup is very, very good as well. But you look at Corey Kluber, Trevor Bauer, Cody Allen, Andrew Miller out of the bullpen, Frankie Lindor. You look at what Jose Ramirez has done. Even Jay Bruce, since being traded over from the Mets, Jay Bruce has been impressive for the Indians. They just feel like the team that is going back to the World Series here. And this is nothing, as I mentioned with Whitney. I mean, I grew up a Red Sox fan. This is no bias against the Yankees. I think they have a tremendous team. Really impressed with what they've done this year and what was supposed to be a rebuilding year. But I don't see them advancing past Cleveland. I just don't. In a 3-game series, I think it's too much firepower for Cleveland this year, and they've got that experience to get back into the World Series. So I think Cleveland wins that series. Houston-Boston is so difficult just because there's too many wild card factors there. I mean, obviously, you've got Justin Verlander and you've got some Astros players who have been in the playoffs before, but to make a deep run, nobody's really done that. And then on the Red Sox side, from a pitching standpoint, Chris Sale's never pitched in the postseason. David Price has always struggled there. Even though he's coming out of the bullpen, I think he'll be tremendous. I think this is a series that goes 4 or 5. There won't be a sweep. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this series goes 5. I would take Boston simply because I do think that they, from an offensive standpoint, I think in Fenway they know how to play that wall a little bit better on the defensive side of things as well. And I just think Boston's a better bullpen when you got Craig Kimbrell, who's the best closer in Major League Baseball. And if David Price can really kind of settle in out of the bullpen, which is where he did well. If you remember, back when the Rays made the World Series, I think it was 2008, when the Rays made the World Series, it was David Price coming out of the bullpen. That was how he started, and it was very impressive to see. So if that's his role, that'd be huge for them. And then in the National League, the Nationals, it's just kind of tough to pick because Scherzer's injured, Bryce Harper's not 100%, but Daniel Murphy, Anthony Rendon, and all those other guys are so impressive in that lineup. And then, of course, when you've got Strasburg and you've got everybody else, and they shored up their bullpen, they did the one thing that they needed to do. Washington will be interesting, but they still haven't announced a starter yet. The Cubs, the defending world champs, They've got that experience. They've started to figure it out, and they've quietly been the best team, or the second best team in baseball here in this second half. So I think Chicago beats the Nationals there in that series. The Dodgers, I don't know. They've struggled a lot down the stretch, and even though they have some great pitching, they've always had bugaboos in the playoffs. And Arizona's had their number this year. Arizona, I believe, is 6-0 against them since September against the Dodgers. And I think that continues. I think that they've got some talent there. So I think Arizona knocks off the Dodgers, the number one seed in the National League. Ultimately, I at the beginning of the year, listen, as much as I think Cleveland probably makes it to the World Series again, I picked this at the start of the season. I picked Red Sox, Cubs in the World Series, and Sox in 6, just because I thought on paper they were the best team. Obviously, that hasn't panned out the way that many would have expected, but I'm going to stick with that pick, even though I would not be surprised at all to see Cleveland make the World Series once again. So we'll see how it all pans out. This is my favorite time of the year. One of them, again, October is great. You got football, basketball, hockey starting up as well, and of course Major League Baseball's playoffs. As we get into the actual offseason, we'll talk a bit more on the postseason awards, but I do think that Corey Kluber, especially during that streak with the Indians, he has run away with the Cy Young Award. I think Jose Altuve has earned the MVP, and Aaron Judge is the Rookie of the Year by far. It's no question. In the National League, I have to disagree with Whitney. I think JD Martinez is the National League MVP. If not him, I think Charlie Blackmon. As much as Nolan Arenado has had a great year, Charlie Blackmon has been just as impressive for Colorado. So we'll see what happens there. The Cy Young race is really difficult to try to figure out. I'm just going to give a toss-up and give it to Kershaw just because he has been that guy throughout. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it's a guy like Zach Greinke, though, so you never know. And then, Rookie of the Year has to be Cody Bellinger just because he's kind of the only one that we've all talked about from a rookie standpoint. But we'll get into that stuff more as the postseason progresses and we get into the actual off-season here in Major League Baseball. That'll do it for this week's show. I want to thank you guys so much for being part of it. Big thanks to Josh Parcell, host and founder of College Football Country, the podcast, as well as CFBcountry.com, and Whitney McIntosh, MLB desk writer for SB Nation. We thank her so much for being a part of the show. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the show as well. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, like us, share us with your friends. You can find us on Spreaker.com, Stitcher.com. Visit Public House Media's website, thephmedia.com. You can also find us on iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Google Play. Submit your questions online via Instagram or Twitter at PressRowPHM. You can email them, PressRowPHM@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Press Row Podcast, Public House Media. I'm Christian Heimel. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Heimel. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the show, and as always, I will see you next week on Press Row.